Hello and welcome. Welcome, everybody, as we roll in. Absolutely wonderful to see everyone. Names I recognize, which I just love, and some people I haven't had a chance to meet yet. And really glad to have this opportunity for us all to be together. This is a very, very special Movement Cafe, Climate Cafe, Multifaith, and Fossil Free UMC Cafe as well. An opportunity, of course, these coalitions are great, these groups are great, but there's a lot of overlap in these groups as well. And we have our hearts are aligned and our spirits are afire for this good work. So, welcome, and so glad everyone is here. We're going to have the first full hour of listening to our guests. Bill McKibben is here. William Morris is here. Steve Hucklesby is here. We also have Kathleen Dixon. She's part of Third Act Faith and on the ground doing the work. And we're going to be listening to them. Then, in the second half of the program, the last bit, instead of breakout rooms, we're going to hear from people who might lead a breakout room otherwise. So, they're going to give us quick information about what you can do next. So that's kind of our flow for today. We're going to listen to the information and then we're going to hear about what actions are possible and what can happen next. And I so glad, and I see Sharon has joined us, and so also Sharon is part of our team with Fossil Free UMC. She's convening that team, so it's great to see her. So we are a bigger group today, but we do share some agreements about kindness. We are kind in this group. It's okay if you have a different perspective or different point of view. Climate Cafe is kind of my piece of this, in addition to the Movement Cafe, is about being in a circle with people and having a conversation. And a really good circle conversation means not everybody is in agreement. So that can add a lot of richness. But here we're really kind. Here we're kind and we listen and we care for each other. That's what we do. So my name is Reverend Mershenda Fairhurst, and I am a United Methodist. I am a member of the Pacific Northwest Conference, but I live in Oregon. So I think of myself as a Denzian of the greater Northwest area. The greater Northwest area is Oregon and Washington and Idaho and Alaska. So it's a pretty cool place to be from. And y'all from many places. So I want to encourage you to introduce yourself, to put your name in the chat and where you're from. If you're connected to Third Act Faith, or if you're connected to a divestment movement, or you're connected to creation justice, you're part of a green team or a creation care team in your church. I want to shout out to Grace Pugh Hubbard. She is actually leading up the Green team for the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement. And divestment work can feel like it's really big, like only the people at the top really get a say or understand what's going on. But from my point of view, divestment is about everybody at the local church and how we live together and how we understand where our money is going, where our treasures are, as Sharon would say. So I think that local church work, those local green teams and creation care teams, couldn't be more important in this work. All right, so the next thing I'd like to do then is introduce Sharon Delgado and Kathy Velasquez Eberhardt. And as I say, they are kind of co-hosts here and really glad to be here and have this come together so well. So Reverend Sharon Delgado is an ordained United Methodist minister, speaker, and activist. And she's author of Shaking the Gates of Hell and Love in a Time of Climate Change and the Cross in the Midst of Creation. And currently, she is the convener of Fossil Free UMC, and she's working in hope that the UMC will choose to divest. And also, Kathy Velasquez Eberhardt. Kathy is a founding member and lead organizer of the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement. And she was commissioned as a UN Earthkeeper in 2016 through the General Board of Global Ministries, and she served for 7 years on the board of Interfaith Power and Light. And all of you who are Earth Keepers, uh, you know, throw up a little celebration emoji because there are so many Earth Keepers on this call, and this is fantastic work, really good work, and I'm really glad you're here. So I want to let Sharon introduce the topic of the cafe and a quick introduction to the fossil-free movement. And so I'm going to turn that over to Sharon now. Go ahead, Sharon.
Thank you, Rashinda. Yes, as convener of Fossil Free UMC, I also want to welcome everyone who's on this call. It's exciting to be here at this time in this place. And for this conversation with Bill McKibben on divesting from fossil fuels as a response to climate change, and especially within faith communities. And then the specific focus will be moving to the movement within the United Methodist Church to divest from fossil fuels, which is right now being led by Fossil Free UMC, the new and revived, just and free, fossil free UMC, as we have said. We are gearing up for General Conference, which is going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina, for those of you who don't know. And that will be from April 23rd to March 3rd. We are supporting a petition, and that petition is calling on the General Conference to vote for the United Methodist Church to add fossil fuels. It just has two words in this that we're adding them to the ethical investment screens. We screen out certain things for ethical reasons, and we're asking the United Methodist Church to screen out fossil fuels because of the harm that they cause. We are reaching out to our delegates, and we're reaching out to all of you, and you all can reach out to your delegates. We'll talk afterwards about some of the things that we can do. We are posting articles, we're creating talking points, and at the end of the program, we will be sharing some of what you can do to help. And that includes a sign-on petition that we're just kicking off today that calls on the United Methodist Church to divest from fossil fuels. You can always go to our website, fossilfreeumc.net. You can contact us at info@fossilfreeumc.net. And I hope you enjoy this program.
So thank you, Sharon. And Kathy, I want to give you a chance also to talk about the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement and the Movement Café.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. So exciting to see so many of you here today. I am glad to welcome you as a member of the growing and emerging United Methodist Creation Justice Movement. There are many places that we can work to address climate change. But as United Methodists, we have the unique opportunity to work within this denomination, within this institution, to make use of the resources and the people and the networks and the connections that we have to make change, to organize, to think about what more we can do together. And so while the United Methodist Church has a really rich history of affirming this vocation of working on creation justice. In the recent years, as more of us have felt an increased urgency to take action, we've recognized that we can do that in some unique ways through this institution, through our local churches, through our annual conferences. By connecting our annual conferences in jurisdictions, we can look at resolutions in our annual conferences or at general conference. That's part of what we'll be talking about today. But we can also continue to ask, what else might we do together? And some of the answers to that we'll talk more about later, but we've started a number of work teams that are doing exciting things around worship, around advocacy, around local church empowerment and green teams, around all kinds of activities. So we'll have more to do and to talk about there, but to learn more, you can start by going to the umcreationjustice.org website, and I look forward to hearing more and getting more involved with you. And if you have an idea of something more our movement could be doing together, please reach out. We'd be glad to start a new work team or a new effort. I'll turn it back to you, Rashinda.
Awesome. Thank you, Kathy. And just a reminder, as people roll in, to just to say welcome and remind everyone that this is a kind space where we are kind to each other, and to put your introduce yourself in the chat. If you have questions too, as they come up, as we hear from folks, feel free to put those in the chat. We will be monitoring that. And when we get to our Q&A portion, we're going to be pulling things out that we think might be real kind of important to cover or helpful. I'm going to turn it back to Sharon now, because she is going to introduce our first guest. Bill McKibben is here with us, and we couldn't be more pleased. So Sharon, if you want to introduce Bill, that would be great.
Thank you, Rishinda. Yes, my first introduction to Bill McKibben was when I read the book he wrote, The End of Nature. And that was when I was in seminary, and it influenced the course of my studies, and it influenced the course of my life. It's been translated into 24 languages, and it's the first book for a general audience on climate change. He's gone on to write 20 books, many, many articles, and I follow him every week. I continue to read his column. It's always, especially this most recent one. I'll just put in a plug for that. Bill is a founder of 350.org, which has organized climate demonstrations simultaneously on every continent, including Antarctica. It's been pretty exciting. I still have a lot of those pictures. Amazing. Also now the founder of Third Act, which is for elders, now that Bill is in the third act, as many of us are, of our lives. And I've been a part of Third Act Faith, so the faith component, the faith working group. Bill has been hugely instrumental in the global movement to divest from fossil fuels, which has now resulted in institutions with combined assets of over $40 trillion divesting from fossil fuels. Recent post in our fossil-free UMC.net on our website was a post that is based on his now famous article written over a decade ago called Do the Math, talking about why the math says we must divest from fossil fuels. Oh, I neglected to say that 35% of those institutions divesting are faith communities. So Bill, thank you so much for being here to share your knowledge and your experience and your expertise with us.
Well, Sharon, thank you very much, and Rishinda and everybody else for having me. And it's fun to look at the screen here and see some old friends and colleagues from around the country. Look, you got to begin with the disclaimers. I'm not only a pastor or a theologian or anything like that. I'm the highest I ever rose in the Methodist hierarchy was Sunday school teacher, and even that in such a small rural church that I've said on occasion that the only qualification for office was whether you could take a tea towel and turn a third grader into a Palestinian shepherd on Christmas Eve. And if you could, you were in. So take it for what it's worth from me. I do know a lot, sometimes more than I'd like to, about climate science and the state of our planet. Because I did write the first book about all of this a long time ago, 35 years ago now, when I was in my 20s, late 20s. And I've followed it, worked on it ever since, and founded the first big global grassroots climate organizing effort called 350.org that's organized 20,000 rallies in every country on earth except North Korea, and have the scars to show from the fights over everything from the Keystone Pipeline and the Dakota Access Pipeline to our very recent and very important big win when the Biden administration paused the permitting of new gas export facilities. So here are the 3 or 4 things I want to say. One, we're in a lot of trouble. When I wrote The End of Nature in 1989, I think the year that I had in my imagination was something like 2023. which, well, by June, the climatologists were saying we're now seeing the hottest days we've ever recorded on this planet. Our records in terms of thermometers go back about 200 years, but scientists are good at building proxy records from glacial cores and lake sediments. They're now very confident that last year featured the hottest weather on this planet in at least 125,000 years. 125,000 years ago, human beings, the archaeologists tell us there are the very first examples of people beginning to etch symbols on bones. We're at the beginning of human culture. Nothing that would resemble a civilization that we would recognize has ever existed on a planet with a temperature as hot as the one we're now producing. And the results of that are terrifying. You all just watched in the last week the largest wildfire in the history of Texas, another one of these atmospheric rivers drenching the West Coast. These are two sides of the climate coin. Warm air holds more water vapor than cold, so you get more evaporation and hence more drought and then more fire. Once that water is evaporated up into the atmosphere, it's going to come down, so you get more deluge and flood. Where I live in Vermont, we had, it was our turn to be on the end of the hose last summer. We had the worst flooding in our history. My small town, dirt road town up in the mountains, got more rain than any place else in the state. We lost the house of a neighbor to a landslide. You couldn't get in and out of town for a couple of weeks. But, Vermont, like most of the United States, still has enough money to be able to insulate itself a little bit for the moment. Not true in the rest of the world. A month after our flooding rains, Libya had the biggest rainstorm they've ever recorded. So much rain came down in a couple of hours that it first washed out 2 big dams, and then the river behind those dams tore into a city and washed 10,000 people out to sea, where they drowned in an hour. That kind of thing happens regularly now around the world. It's always worth remembering that along with the existential practical questions that it raises, climate change is also the biggest moral challenge we've ever come up against. That's because the people who suffer the most did the least to cause it. I just told you about Libya. All of Africa has put about 3% of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that are in the atmosphere, and yet they're taking the brunt of the damage. The United States has put about 25% of all the greenhouse gases up there. The carbon dioxide that came out of the tailpipe of my family's maroon Plymouth Fury in 1974, when I was getting my learner's permit, is all still up in the atmosphere, trapping heat. No country will ever catch up with us. This is our fault above all. Second thing I want to tell you is good news, which is that we increasingly know what we need to do to change. The scientists and engineers have performed what I think you really could come close to calling a miracle in the last decade. They've dropped the price of renewable energy, sun power and wind power, 90%, and the batteries to store it when the sun goes down or the wind drops. We now live on a planet where the cheapest way to produce power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. That is water into wine kind of miracle, if you think about it. And it allows us to imagine not only bringing the climate crisis to a stop before it wrecks everything, but also saving the lives of the 9 million people a year, 1 death in 5 on this planet, that die from breathing the combustion byproducts of fossil fuel. If you've been to Delhi or Shanghai or someplace in recent years, you have some sense of how big that problem of smoke and smog is, but it happens everywhere. There are hundreds of thousands of cases of childhood asthma in this country every year from breathing the smoke from coal and gas and oil. And we all know who gets to live next to the highway and who gets to live next to the refinery, and why this is a justice challenge at the deepest level. We could make this shift. We could, here's a Sunday school way of saying it, we could rely on energy from heaven instead of hell. And we could do it in short order. And that would be a beautiful and transformative moment in the human story. Third thing to know, we have to do this fast if it's going to matter, because if we don't, we'll go past tipping points from which there's no return. God gave us a remarkable planet, but it comes with certain features that if you wreck them, change everything. So, for instance, if we finish the job of melting the Arctic, nobody has a plan for freezing it back up again. The scientists have told us that we have until 2030 to cut emissions in half if we're to have any chance of meeting those temperature targets we so boldly proclaimed in Paris in 2015 at the climate talks. 2030, by my watch, is 5 years and 9 months away. Not a lot of time. It's on the bleeding edge of the technically possible, but it would be an enormous challenge even if everyone was working in good faith. Which brings us to point 4, not everyone is working in good faith. Rashenda, you'll have to stop me if you think I'm being unkind here, but I'm just going to be real for a minute. The fossil fuel industry, we now know from great investigative reporting, has spent the last 30 years systematically building this architecture of deceit and denial and disinformation around climate. It turns out they knew everything that was to know about climate back in the 1980s when I was writing that book. Their scientists were hard at work. Exxon was the biggest company in the world. It had great scientists. Their product was carbon. Of course, they were going to find out what was going on, and they did. Their scientists predicted to their executives with great accuracy what the temperature would be in 2020. And they were believed. Exxon executives started, for instance, building all their drilling rigs higher in order to compensate for the rise in sea level they knew was coming. But what they didn't do was tell any of the rest of us. Instead, they went around insisting that they hired many of the people who used to work for the tobacco industry. And my guess is, by the way, that one of those exclusions for investment at the UMC is around tobacco products. Hired those people and had to make the same argument they've been making about cigarettes. The science is unclear, we don't know, on and on and on. It's no longer possible to deny climate change, really, because there have been too many floods and too many fires. So the new face of climate denial is climate delay. And this is what you hear most powerfully from the heart of the fossil fuel industry. Sharon alluded to this Substack newsletter, our free newsletter that I write every week called The Crucial Years. And the most recent one was about a talk that the CEO of Exxon gave last week. And the first thing he said that was almost unbelievable, he said, well, it would be nice to use renewable energy, but we have waited too long to rely on this, as if it was not he and his predecessors who had caused us to wait too long, who had worked on everything they could to make sure that we would wait too long. And then he explained, and I think quite straightforwardly, and I think in a way that's very important for everyone to understand, he explained why Exxon would not be doing renewable energy anyway. I often hear from people the question, why didn't, if Exxon and people knew climate change was coming, why didn't they get ahead of this curve and decide to dominate the renewable energy industry and so on, which they could have. But as he explained, the reason is it does not offer, and I'm quoting directly here, does not offer above average returns. What he means is that God gives us the sun for free. Once you've put up a solar panel, then the sun delivers the energy every day when it rises above the horizon. The sun heats the planet differentially, creating the winds that turn those turbines. You can make money doing that, but you can't make as much money as you can make if you have control of reserves of coal and gas and oil that you can monopolize and sell. That's what's made the fossil fuel industry the richest industry on planet Earth, and that's what they're unwilling to give up. And that's why they continue working very hard to game our political system to make sure that we do not get the dramatic change that scientists tell us we desperately need. So the hopeful idea, I think, among people of good conscience has always been, we'll just keep talking to people like Exxon. We will engage with them, is the term of art. We'll go to shareholder meetings. We'll tell them about climate change. Eventually, they will come around. They have made it abundantly clear that they will not come around. They are going to continue doing what they know how to do, which is dig stuff up and set it on fire. And if we want to change at the speed that science requires, we have to, among other things, be able to break some of their political power. And that's one of the reasons that divestment is important. It is a powerful statement from places that matter to people that they no longer want to be engaged in this particular shell game. I hadn't thought about that, but there you go. That's why it's been so remarkable to watch this movement spread so fast. In a decade, become the largest corporate campaign of its kind in history. Sharon said we're about $40 trillion in as endowments and portfolios and pension funds and things that have divested. The news this morning was that the Oregon legislature voted today to divest, which is very, very good news. But this includes extraordinary number of secular institutions that are doing it in large part because they understand, A, that it's be a good thing to do, and B, that it's a financially sound thing to do, because as renewable energy becomes ever cheaper, the fossil fuel stocks produce lower returns. If you divested 10 years ago, you would be far better off now than you are at the moment, because the fossil fuel sector has underperformed the rest of the economy dramatically. But those, secular institutions are most of the world's great higher education institutions: the University of California, the University of Michigan, Harvard, Princeton, Oxford, Cambridge. They include huge pension funds: New York City, Quebec, Holland, on and on and on. They include an increasing number of big insurance companies and others. And they also include a lot now of religious institutions who have the second reason to divest, that we're called upon to protect creation. It's the first thing we were asked to do. Even us Sunday school teachers have read the Bible through the first page, and so we have pretty good sense that that was the original ask. And man, have we done it poorly. Asked to take care of the planet, to steward it. We've, raised its temperature. We've, acidified its oceans, on and on and on. We're running Genesis in reverse. We're engaged in a rapid course of decreation. And so for people who say that they care about creation, who take seriously God's injunction that all this stuff that God was making was good and we were supposed to look after it, we have double, triple the reason to do the right thing. not to just temporize with the powers and principalities, but instead to act with a certain amount of boldness here, and maybe even be willing to overturn a table or two of this particular set of money changers in the temple of creation. And so it's been really fun to watch denomination after denomination do the right thing, Lutherans, Episcopalians, on and on and on, and been really wonderful to have strong support from the guy who may be the most effective environmentalist on the planet, Pope Francis, drawing on the legacy of his namesake of Assisi, and speaking out loudly and clearly against investments in fossil fuels. Many, many of the institutions that have divested are from the Catholic tradition as well. So it's been a big, beautiful thing that's been going on, and it'll be great fun to have more people join in. It's one of the easiest things that one can do to make a difference. Many of the things that we have to do about climate take a while or a lot of hard work, require wires and screws and bolts and panels and on and on and on. They're all important. We got to do them. But simply saying to your investment advisor, we're no longer going to do fossil fuel. We consider it in the same way that we consider casinos and things in our investment policy, is dead easy, and we should be on it. I'll just finish by saying, if I haven't gone on too long already, I'll just finish by saying the other group of people who I think have a particular, besides people of faith who have a particular reason to be working hard in this, are people of a certain age, because we created the world that's heating up so rapidly, and we're going to be leaving it. We're going to be the first people leaving behind a world that works a lot less well than the one that we were born into, which is not the legacy that we want. That's why we started Third Act a couple of years ago. It's grown very rapidly, organizing people over the age of 60 around the country. It's mostly organized in geographic chapters, and they're in pretty much every state now, but there are also great chapters of Third Act educators, Third Act lawyers, and Third Act faith, which has been a beautiful, beautiful part of this story. So in case you know any people over the age of 60, maybe tell your grandparents about what we're up to, because it's really fun to be, to be trying to act the way we need elders acting in a working society. And it's been moving as heck to watch people come together to do it. So there I will end, just with thanks and greetings from the sadly snow-free Green Mountains of Vermont. But it's a real pleasure to get to be with you all today.
Oh, wonderful. Yes. Thank you for shouting out the Oregon Legislature, Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, and Oregon Interfaith Power and Light. Myself, in a tiny way, have been, and I'll tell you, if the Oregon Treasury can agree to at least this, the Coal Act, they've been super grumpy about divestment, very, very grumpy and obstinate and refusing and not even letting anybody see anything. You can move it. We can be there. We can be present. We can show up. And so thank you. Thank you so much, Bill. I want to introduce William Morris. And the next part of what we'll do together is William and Bill are going to engage in a little bit of dialogue. So William Morris is a young climate activist with a degree in environmental science with an emphasis on ecological restoration and watershed management. William is a faith organizer with Green Faith, working on the People versus Fossil Fuels campaign. He also serves as co-chair for the Young Evangelicals for Climate Action and is on the steering committee. He volunteers with the Climate Reality Project and is the founder and chair of the Los Angeles chapter, their faith-based communities committee. And he's worked with faith organizations in Kenya, Chad, and Indonesia. and is the founder and chair of the Creation Care Committee at his local United Methodist Church. You might have seen his work in Rolling Stone magazine, ABC News, or BBC, which is, if you're as cool as William, you get that kind of wonderful storytelling about your work and your actions and what you care about. So, William, I'm going to turn it over to you and Bill, and for just as you have an opportunity to have some dialogue together.
Thanks, Rashenda. Really appreciate that. And thank you so much, Bill, for your offering for us this morning as we're here to listen and take in your words and wisdom. I know everyone has really been appreciating it and seeing the things in the chat as well. So we're talking about divestment and finances today, and oftentimes we think about that stuff as numbers on a screen, numbers in a spreadsheet, numbers on a report. But like you said, those investments have real world impacts to the people in Libya suffering from these torrential rains, to where you are in Vermont, where there's no snow on the mountains, to my own hometown where I was born and raised, living next to a refinery. And so how do we help people make the connections from these seemingly just numbers on a screen to the real world impacts that are happening on the ground?
Well, first of all, William, what a pleasure to get to be with you and just to say thanks for all your good work. And it's a very good question. And it should be kind of easy, it seems to me, for Christians to be making this connection. Some better theologian than me is going to have to, but someplace in Matthew, isn't there, don't we learn that where your treasure is, there your heart is also? I mean, the connection between money and and things that happen in the real world, and money and the things that as an expression of who we are, couldn't be clearer. We've come to live in a world that thinks that often that money is just amoral and the whole job is to get more of it and whatever, but that clearly can't be right. Otherwise, for instance, the UMC wouldn't already have decided to divest from things like gambling that are bad, but probably not doing as much damage in the world as raising the temperature of the planet is. So it shouldn't be that hard. Money is the oxygen on which the fires of global warming burn. If you could staunch the flow of money to the fossil fuel industry, you would end their ability to expand. And in the vacuum that you would create, there's no question that it would be filled by an even more rapid build out of renewable energy. That's just the bottom line. Where your treasure is, there your heart is also.
Thanks, Bill. That is great. Yeah, I really agree with that. And can think of an example here in Los Angeles, where I live, where there is a neighborhood oil drilling site that is right by homes. It's right by a school for the deaf, senior care homes, just a comically evil and bad place for this drilling site to be. And the group that owns it and leases it out to the oil company is the Los Angeles Catholic Archdiocese. And so I think it's a very direct example of where your money is, that's where your values and that treasure is. And so
I will say the one piece of good news is that activists have done a wonderful job now finally in changing the laws in California. So with any luck, we won't have quite the same scandal of from Los Angeles to Kern County of oil drilling going on in school playgrounds, essentially.
Yes, absolutely. And faith institutions have been a big part of that as well, part of these coalitions here in LA. And so I think it shows that these faith institutions have a choice of which side kind of they want to be on and where they want their money and their values to be and how it's going to reflect upon them and ourselves. So thanks, Bill, for that. And the next question is that climate finance investments, this is such a big topic for folks. Sometimes it seems so zoomed out and hard to understand, or maybe talking about money in church is really taboo. and is something that folks don't want to talk about. And so how do you encourage folks to get past maybe some of that fear and paralysis of how big it is or the taboo-ness and use their voice because it does matter?
Well, one of the reasons that we started the whole divestment campaign in the first place is that most of us don't have an oil well right in the backyard, don't have a pipeline going through our neighborhood, don't live right next to a coal mine. A lot of people do, but most people don't. But everyone lives near a pot of money, a university endowment, a pension fund, a church fund. And so it's actually the perfect excuse to have and to educate people about climate right close to home, because this fight has to go on everywhere and quickly if we're going to have any chance of changing the trajectory at which we're on. So actually money is a perfect way to talk about it, because it's the way in the modern world that most people are implicated in, and most institutions are implicated in climate change. And the numbers are astounding. For instance, there's been a bunch of new data within the last year or so that shows that if an individual or a congregation has $100,000 sitting in the bank, and that bank is making loans regularly to the fossil fuel industry, that's producing more emissions than that person would produce in a whole year of driving, flying, heating, cooking, cooling. So this is not some minor part of this. This is the central way in which most of us participate in overheating the planet. And it's good for us to think about it collectively, because we're thinking about collective things, pension funds, for instance. Americans default to a kind of individualism all the time. That's who we are. And it's not so good from a theological point of view, I don't think. And it's definitely not good from a point of view of getting things done. So like if we think about climate change, we think, well, do I have solar panels? What's in my garage? I'm proud that I've got solar panels on the roof. I'm glad they connect to an EV in the garage. I don't try to fool myself that that's going to solve this problem. We are past the point. Remember, we've got 6 years. We're past the point where we're going to deal with this one Tesla at a time. So the real way to think about this, perhaps, is not just as a problem, something that the church is doing wrong, but as a great opportunity, a point of leverage for the church to act affirmatively and powerfully in the direction of creation protection.
Thanks for that, Bill. Yeah, like you said, not everyone is living and seeing these effects right by where they are. And sometimes it feels like, man, how do I do something and get involved? And it's hard to help. Anytime we do these toxic tours around our community and show folks the refinery, they have really strong reactions of, what's happening here and want to do something, or learning about, another thing ExxonMobil did. They used to own the refinery that exploded in our town and faced no consequences, of course, from that. But folks hear these stories and see what the community deals with and are very moved and want to do something, but they don't feel the same way oftentimes talking about their money and how that is connected. So thank you for helping make that connection about how we all are around these pods of money, and that money is helping implicate us, and that money is showing where our values are placed. I think that is a really great way for folks to connect, especially that statistic of if you have that $100,000 sitting there and the way that is being used and the emissions that it is creating. I think that helps tie some of that imagery together of this money isn't just numbers on a screen. This is producing emissions. This is harming these communities when it's used in the wrong way. So thanks for that. And it seems like money is a way for us to go beyond the individual action and to tap into this systemic change when we are pushing our faith institutions to shift where their investments are. We're not just doing these things at that individual level, but we're really able to tap in to something much bigger. And I think that really gives folks a sense of empowerment and not feeling quite so much like my actions aren't doing enough. But when it comes to money and investments, it really is, if we're able to shift them. And the next question, Bill, is some of us have really big moments in our life where we know we need to do something. Some of us have multiple small moments. And so how do we find that moment for ourselves, for divestment, for the next generation? Like what did that maybe look like for you, or from folks you work with, or stories you've heard? What was that?
Well, this has been such a huge movement, and it's so the answers are myriad for many people. I will say, since I wrote the article that sort of kicked it off, it was remarkable for me to realize that if you looked at the announced business plans of the fossil fuel industry, they had identified and were planning to dig up and burn 5 times more fossil fuel than scientists said we could do and still meet these temperature targets. 5 times more. Once we said that math on paper, it was like, you know, we have to change, we have to alter this story, or the ending to this drama is written, but one comes up with new ways all the time. Sometime in the next 3 or 4 or 5 days, my daughter is supposed to be delivering our first grandchild. I don't think that's quite how she would describe what she's doing, but and I'm very taken with the realization that this child's going to be alive well into the 22nd century, and that we have a heck of a lot of work to do to make sure that there is a kind of 22nd century for this baby to grow in. So the motivations change over time, and sometimes it's just pure intellectual frustration with our inability. God gave us brains. The scientists who have developed this part of their brain have given us fair warning of what's coming. And it just irks the heck out of me that we haven't yet, as a society, taken that warning seriously. And if I get mad at the fossil fuel industry, it's because I know that they have done their best to make sure that we didn't take it seriously, that they have put a millstone of misinformation around our necks, and it is time to shake it off.
I think that is a wonderful place to end my questions, especially with the thought of the next generations that are coming into this world, and those who will be inheriting what's left here. And so just thank you again, Bill, for answering those questions. And I know the next part we're going to move on to just some general Q&A. So I'll pass it back to Rashinda.
Thank you, William. Oh my gosh. So that was marvelous. There's something that happens in dialogue. That's kind of why we call this a cafe. The idea of climate cafes and movement cafes and how we talk together matters. So we do have just a couple minutes, maybe 1 or 2 questions, maybe one. And I am going to, we've sort of reached into the chat. And this is a question from Lela, I think, who says that they recently wrote an opinion piece for the Episcopal Church's Creation Care newsletter about the church pension fund to divest their $17 billion from fossil fuels. And she was told that they couldn't legally divest or do that because of their fiduciary responsibilities. A number of us have heard this. So Bill, what is this fiduciary responsibility conversation?
Sure. So first thing to say is everybody gets to decide what they want to invest their money in. I mean, you can tell that it's fine to do it because the Methodist Church and the Episcopal Church already do it for other categories of things. And so clearly there's no legal bar. When people talk about the fiduciary duty, they mean they have a duty to make a good return because the money is useful. It goes to pay pensions, it pays for churches, on and on and But it's very easy to meet that test because, as study after study has shown, it's entirely possible. In fact, it's clear that you've made more money, not less, by divesting from fossil fuel. Trust me. Take an institution like Harvard University, with the biggest endowment of any educational institution on earth, north of $50 billion, I think now, staffed with the most up-to-the-minute investment professionals that there are on planet Earth. Harvard is my alma mater, and there are times when I think that it's really just a kind of hedge fund with a college attached to the side. But you can rest assured they would not have divested from fossil fuel if they were in any doubt about whether or not they'd be able to meet their fiduciary responsibilities. When people say this, basically what they're saying is, I don't want to be bothered doing something different. We're just going to stick with what we've been doing all along. And here's a fancy sounding word that offers an excuse. But there's no legal impediment to doing it, as I say, as you can tell, because churches routinely refuse to invest their funds in all kinds of things. As one would hope, you wouldn't want a church, that was trying to make money off pornography or, whatever it is, any more than you'd want it trying to make money off the destruction of the planet.
Thank you. I forgive me for putting my own question in here as our last opportunity for questions, but something big came up in the fossil-free conversation about climate finance as evolving. So this seems like a big word where we can all feel good about. Maybe we're just not trying to admit that we have really no idea what's going to happen on Earth for the next 10 years, and we're just going to do our best now and help everybody that we can help and save every ecosystem that we can. But what would you say to a group that might say, well, we don't want to divest because climate finance is evolving? Does that strike you in any way?
It is evolving, which is good. There's lots and lots more money going into renewable energy now. And that's really, and the returns on it have been fine, and that's really important. But what hasn't been evolving is the position of the fossil fuel companies. They're not taking part in this transition, and they've made that clear. They're investing 1 or 2% of their research and CapEx funds in renewable energy, and 98% in their traditional business of oil and gas. And that goes back to what I told you in this, and you can read about. I'll try and put in the chat this link to my most recent newsletter of mine. This goes straight back to this interview with the CEO of Exxon. You can't make, he says, above average returns on renewable energy, the kind of returns that they've been making on fossil fuel. And again, the reason that you can't, and this is a really critical thing to kind of understand, the reason you can't make above average returns on renewable energy is because the good Lord sends us the sun for free. I've just stuck the link into the chat for this newsletter so you can read it for yourself. But the fact that it's free for Exxon makes it the silliest business model of all time. They've gotten rich for 100 years by making you write a check every time you want a new increment of energy. That's their business model. And it's not the business model that we need. We need the one where abundance provided from the heavens allows us to make this shift. We need it for climate reasons. We need it for public health reasons. It's also turns out one of the most powerful ways to help the rest of the world. 80% of people on this planet live in countries that have to import fossil fuel. That's the reason that they end up with disastrous balance of trade deficits and are forever having to have austerity budgets and on and on and on. The sun and the wind are everywhere. God put them everywhere. If we relied on them instead of the few deposits of coal and gas and oil scattered around the world, then we would be in a much better place. The only people who wouldn't would be the people who control those scattered deposits of coal and gas and oil. Exxon, Vladimir Putin, the Koch brothers. They would be in a worse place, which is why they fight so hard to make sure that that doesn't happen. Our job is to be part of that fight, not back away from it, but to take responsibly and maturely our obligation to actually engage in what is the most important set of changes going on this planet. And we can do it because we have this tool called money sitting around in enough abundance that it'll make a difference. So that's the bottom line, Rashenda. Thank you.
Awesome. Yes. Oh my goodness. That's wonderfully, wonderfully said. And thank you so much for all the wisdom and insight and the work of your life to pull this together now on the cusp of your grandchild being born. I have a grandson, and it yet again another big shift in perspective. This little person deserves clean air, clean water, and a life of well-being, and we want to see that happen. I want to move to our next speaker here. He is joining us from London, and so very, very glad that he is able to be with us. So let me introduce Steve Hucklesby. He is a policy advisor on international affairs for the Methodist Church in Britain and the Joint Public Issues team. He's on that team as well, specializing in foreign and defense policy, climate change, and ethical investment. He is committed to prayerful, theologically informed reflection on international affairs and political engagement. He brings experience of work within the NGO sector, working with governmental and multilateral organizations in the delivery of humanitarian aid in conflict settings. And he acts as an advisor to the Joint Advisory Committee of the Ethics of Investment of the Methodist Church in Britain, and has worked with Operation Noah, Just Money, and other campaigning groups on behalf of climate issues. So thank you so much for being with us, Steve. We're going to love this divestment story, and really I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. So I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Rashenda. And it's absolute delight to be with you. Thank you very much for inviting me. A delight also to be with Bill McKibben. I can't say how much and how important his outstanding leadership has been, not only in the United States, but in other countries as well. Not only through his writing, but in the movement building, in thought leadership that he's provided, and in his risky protest as well, which people may well know about. And it's been really quite inspirational for many of us. So just want to put that on record from the UK. I'm going to share a few observations about some of our journey in the UK, not because I think that would be instructive for you or something you can learn from, but rather because I hope that it might provide an inspiration and encouragement for you. So the headline from the UK is that all church denominations in England, Scotland and Wales are currently disinvested from fossil fuels. The last significant disinvestment was the Church of England in 2023. And I'm just going to offer a few, I think, observations from for how we got there. Really important role was played by church members in all of this. Part of the catalyst for this was Operation Noah, which is a campaign and education organization that is separate from the churches, but works across the churches, not only with the established denominations, but also with independent churches. I was involved in Operation Noah from its inception in 2005 through to about 2014, when we put together a campaign called the Bright Now campaign, I can take no credit personally for the achievements of that campaign since 2014, and therefore I'm entirely happy to be able to sing its praises to you because of that. The campaign is focused on resourcing, educating, and mobilizing church members to work with their local churches, but also to work with national churches in bringing about disinvestment from fossil fuels. I worked initially with Anne Pettifor. Anne Pettifor may be known to some. She's the author of a best-selling book, The Coming First World Debt Crisis, and she was director for Operation Noah for a number of years when I was a trustee. And she's an inspiration for me, and I learned from her quite a bit about leadership. She saw the vision, her vision for Operation Noah was to create the advocacy and political space that we would like to see the church leadership occupy, and then to challenge the church leadership to come and join us there. So that's how we saw our role. And that's quite a tall order, because there's a number of things that you need to do if you're going to achieve that aspiration. I'm just going to touch on three. First of all, you need to know your theology. Secondly, you need to build a movement. And then thirdly, you need to be very clear and intentional about the change that you want to achieve and how you're going to get there. Knowing your theology, for Operation Noah, this meant identifying some really good key theologians. They tended to be alternative theologians, but they were academics with good standing, and so they could also be trusted by people. And we came up with something called the Ash Wednesday Declaration, and that eventually was accepted by all the UK churches, but it was a really challenging document of its time. Let me talk about building a movement very briefly, and here I need to give a shout out to 350.org, which Bill McKibben has had such a big role in founding. It's been really important, I think, from the UK perspective, and for campaigners here to feel that they're part of something bigger, and that whatever we do in the UK is part of a global movement, because we're all aware that we can only tackle this problem if we do that across the world. So 350 is important in that respect, and as Operation Noah, we sort of operated, if you like, as the UK church end of 350.org. And we encouraged people when signing up to Operation Noah also to sign up to 350.org. Let me come on now then to your aims and being intentional. And the Bright Now campaign was very intentional about what we wanted to achieve at the end of the day. And we realized that we would need a journey to get there that involved a number of church members building a movement across our churches, but also intentional in terms of working with some key activists who we know would be the instrumental leaders in bringing about change. And we worked with those activists by introducing a program that enabled them in each of the denominations to understand the governance structures and to work out how they could use those structures to bring about institutional change. So I'm going to mention here that there are two churches, the Church of England and the Methodist Church, that operate investments in a similar way to that of the United Methodist Church. So the Church of England and the Methodist Church both have their own investment houses in the City of London, Epworth Investment Management in the case of the Methodist Church, CCLA in case of the Church of England. Those investment houses are very professional investment firms. They also have a third-party business. they manage investments for a number of charities and other organizations, both Christian but beyond the Christian sphere as well. This means that they are they're beholden to a number of investment standards and benchmarks, therefore somewhat institutionally constrained in the way in which they go about their policies. That needn't daunt us as church members, because we can set up a dialogue with those organizations. But one of the roles that Operation Noah undertook through the Bright Now campaign was to support activists in that dialogue, so the dialogue could be already conversant with the sort of pressures that some of those investment institutions were under. Let me switch now to how the change happened within the Methodist Church in Britain. So in 2017, these activists brought a resolution to the Methodist Conference. I actually think that it was an amendment to a resolution, but what they did was to place a definite timeline for disinvestment. The timeline was a space of 3 years, from 2017 to 2020, by which time any oil or gas company that was not operating in line with the Paris 2015 COP agreement would need to be shed from our investment portfolio. The proposer of the motion was a member of the Methodist Church Youth Conference, and she presented very well. They teamed up. There was a young proposer, and then there was a second who was more, for want of a better word, a member of the British Methodist Church establishment. So I think the important aspect here that this was young people bringing a resolution, but it wasn't young people working in isolation. It was not either a sort of all-age activist group that deliberately went out to seek a youth voice. The voice had come through youth conference, had a support of young people. So this was groups of young people with other groups across the Methodist Church of all ages working in tandem. And that sort of working in concert together was quite evident at Methodist Conference when this resolution was brought. Over the 3 years from 2017 to 2020, the Joint Advisory Committee of the Ethics Investment, which is a Methodist body, which is established by the Conference of Methodist Church in Britain, they advise Epworth Investment Management on ethics. They oversaw a program of progressive disinvestment from oil gas companies. There was an awful lot of work, technical, analytical work that went into that program, resourced by the investment manager themselves. And that was, as a part of that, I was advising on that. And the aim was to be basically to rate at the end of the day 40 oil and gas majors with a sort of a green, orange or red light rating, but according to a set of metrics that was really quite complicated. I think one of the things we have to bear in mind is that, yes, we bring motions to challenge our churches to disinvest from fossil fuels, because that is undoubtedly the essential thing that churches have to do at this stage. But the church investment bodies have to respond to a set of policies, and that's why the motion gave them 3 years in order to put that into action. 3 years seems like a very long time for many people when we're looking at a climate emergency, but we got there. the end result was brilliant. So finally in 2021, we divested from the last 2 oil and gas companies, which were sort of amber at the time. There was a lot of dialogue with all of these companies through the responsible investment arms of our investment management companies. In general, I take the view that a shareholder dialogue can have an impact. When it comes to the oil and gas majors, I take a different view that that impact is not persuasive. And that's, I think, because it's really difficult for these really big majors to make the structural change that is necessary in order to become something different from that which they are within the space of time that is required to address the current climate emergency. Divestment was the only course. And I'll just end very quickly with a headline from the Financial Times, which is you probably know, a major finance newspaper in the UK. And that is Methodist Church dumps shell over inadequate climate plans. And what we also did when disinvesting was we made sure that people knew about it. The patience of the church has run out, said David Palmer, Chief Executive of Epworth, which oversees 1.3 billion for churches and charities. And I'm very, very quite proud of Operation Noah and all of the activists that were instrumental in bringing that change about.
Oh my goodness, I couldn't be more pleased either, because you're a Methodist example, right? So when we start talking about what Methodist, what's faithful, this is the exemplar part of this, Steve, with what the Methodist Church in Britain was able to do. And we're not asking for brand new territory. In a lot of ways, you broke ground. Now we have these roadmaps, and it's going to be much easier to follow the roadmaps that already exist. And so thank you so much. Really grateful that you're here. If you want to add any of those links to the chat, we do have some links that we're going to be adding to the chat. So you'll be able to find these things, and there'll be follow-up. So wow. I want to shift real quick to this next sort of piece of like, what can we do, sort of how it inspires us. I want to introduce Kathleen Dixon. She is a member of Third Act Faith, and she began volunteering with Third Act Faith last year, feeling compelled that something needed to be done. And she's run Otterbee's Market in rural Brookings, Oregon, so a fellow Oregonian, for 20 years, delivering fresh local food. And so she knows that value of earth and well-being and goodness. She attends a small town church in Smith River and plays piano on Sundays. And so all of us are in this together. So I want to invite Kathleen to go ahead and share with us.
Thanks, Rashenda. Hi, guys. So yeah, like Rashenda says, I live on the Southern Oregon coast. I actually go to church in California because I'm only 7 miles from the border. And it's a very small church. I got inspired when I saw Bill McKibben's brief but spectacular take on PBS a year ago. He was talking about Third Act. I desperately needed to find a way to try to make a difference in this last third of my life. And as I explored Third Act, I thought this is perfect. Third Act Faith was a working group that was working on a service of solidarity for the last year's 3-2-1-2-3 campaign, where we were going to the banks and saying, cut it out or we'll cut it up. And so my song leader and I did the music for that service. And that was pretty much all she wrote. I stuck around, and I'm so glad I did. Third Act Faith. Our main focus is supporting Third Act initiatives through a spiritual lens, and sharing them with communities of faith. We are interfaith, ecumenical. Divestment, of course, is a great way to support this climate activism. We basically support and encourage our members who belong to Third Act Faith, who we then anticipate will encourage their little churches, who will then encourage their denominational governing bodies to divest. And we just do that by being informed, being aware, and promoting the advantages of renewable energies over fossil fuels. And it's just one of those things. I just wanted my little church to pay more attention to climate change and to the things we can do as rural people, as small churches, as people of faith, to try to make a difference in this, in my last third of life. So thank you, Rashenda, for asking me to share a little bit. There's a link to Third Act Faith in the chat room, and I imagine Rashenda will drop it down again. Please reach out if you want to get involved with us. We would love to have you. Thanks.
Hope you hear that power of the congregation. And Steve talked about this too, getting the people. I love the way Steve kind of talked about, we're going to create this space, we're going to imagine this space, and then we're going to invite the leadership into it. And I think that's been something that's been a powerful part of the work of the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement. And so I'm going to ask Kathy to just tell us a little bit more. How do you get on board to things like that? What's that group doing? What does that space leadership, what's that movement look like? So go ahead, Kathy.
Yeah, great. Well, it was exciting to know that that is a key part of what was successful in England. We have, in fact, been busy building a movement over the last really number of years, especially, but it is rooted in the long history of words and theology in our social principles and so forth that do commit us to working for God's good creation. A couple of specifics for you. If you want to know where to start, it's the umcreationjustice.org website. That is really where you're going to find it's kind of the hub of this growing movement. At that spot, you're going to find several newsletters that you can get hooked up to. You will find a whole list of work teams that have emerged. I'll just give you a few highlights of those. We have a wonderful worship team that is creating materials that are earth and creation based that we're now excited to be in partnership with discipleship ministries in that work. We have an active advocacy team that works closely with our church and society agency to identify opportunities at the federal and state level for advocacy. We work closely with United Women in Faith, who will be and their Just Energy for All campaign and curriculum. We are working with our seminaries and our colleges through the Board of Higher Education. We work with camping and retreat ministries. And at the local church level, we have a green team effort that if you're wanting to get a conversation started in your local church, there's a whole slew of resources there on that website to help you get inspired and to kind of have some ideas where to start. We do have also a team that is organizing at the annual conference level. So if you want to get involved there, make sure to check out the page that has all of the annual conference teams. And if you don't see your annual conference represented, that we have support to help you get something started as well. So would love to get that happening. And then finally, that particularly the annual conference organizing resulted in a number of model resolutions for annual conferences, but also for general conference. And so we are preparing, we have kind of an action page for general conference. If you go just to that home page, there is a link to our general conference action page. And if you're able to be in Charlotte in April, great. But even if you're not, there are ways to get involved. We will be, mark your calendar in particular for Earth Day. It just happens to be the day before General Conference gets started. And so we will be hosting an Earth Day worship service, both live in Charlotte and online everywhere else. Details will be there on that website, as well as information there for how to forward legislation, including the divestment legislation, to your delegates. There's a lot more, but go ahead and explore the website and reach out if you have ideas that aren't currently represented there. We'd love to start something new if you have a new idea. Thanks, Rishin. I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome. Yeah. And this chat is going to start looking really rich with links. The Ash Wednesday declaration, I'm putting that one in right now. I pride myself, hubris, on knowing a little bit of the range of what's going on. I did not know about this one. So this is exciting to me. I'm going to get a chance to look at that more later. That came out of the England and Wales and Scotland, that milieu of we need to do something. I want to continue sort of how do you get involved? How do you onboard conversation by returning to Sharon Delgado, who's going to share with us a couple things, a little bit more about how to get involved with United Methodist Creation Justice, the fossil-free UMC movement. And I'm going to put some links in there that show how to join that group, but also a sign-on letter, which is really important. The more names we get on this, the more it will help us. So I'm going to turn it over to Sharon and look for those links.
Rishinda, how long do I have? Because I know we're getting close to the end. So
you have 5 minutes. It's not long, but this is a rich conversation. So
that's great. And I'm glad you're putting in the link to the sign-on letter, because we are kicking off this sign-off on letter today. And it's a sign-on letter to divest to the United Methodist Church and agencies to divest from fossil fuels. And I'm going to start not because I need to read something spiritual or use Jesus's words, but Jesus says it far better than I could. If any place will not welcome you and they refuse to hear you, as you leave, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them. And I say that because it is past time for the United Methodist Church. It's to stop negotiating with fossil fuel companies and justifying that and trying to get them to make minor and gradual changes in the midst of this climate crisis, while we are profiting and my pension is, making money off of fossil fuels. It's time to shake the dust off our feet and divest from fossil fuels, the primary driver of climate change. So fossil-free UMC is focused on converting fossil fuel investments to investments that will foster a just and clean energy future. And that is going to go on whether or not this passes at General Conference. We trust that it will. But even however it comes out, we're going to be working with the different agencies, the different foundations, the different local churches, even individuals. We're going to be really trying to make it so to help educate everyone and move us away from fossil fuels. And the first step in that is our General Conference petition to add fossil fuels to our list of ethical investment screens. And I did post a link to the actual petition on our fossil fuel umc.net website. You might not know it, but the United Methodist Church was the first church to pass a resolution at General Conference in 1980. Yes, 1980, calling for the church and for the world, the nations, to move away from fossil fuels and toward clean energy. So we have been talking about this for a long time, acting in different ways, taking stands for environmental justice, climate justice, and so on. But we are still invested in fossil fuels and taking that slow road. So we're moving away from that. There are plenty of things that you can do. I put our contact information, I put our website. You can go to the website and you can subscribe to our posts. You can join us, which means you'll click onto a form and you'll be able to sign up to volunteer. You can ask questions, find out more. We are looking for people who know or are delegates to General Conference who could help us out, because we need support at General Conference in the different committees, but specifically we need someone in the General Administration Committee. And then we need people who would be willing to even support us on the floor of General Conference. And it doesn't even have to be delegates if a delegate invites someone to speak. So, but we need people to help us out and to put us in touch with other leaders in the church, in the United Methodist Church, bishops. If you know of a bishop, we know several, but if you know of a bishop that would be supportive and spread the word to other bishops and congregants, annual conference members, that'd be great. We have a sample letter. It's not posted here, but we have a sample letter to send to your delegates and to introduce this topic. And we will join you. You can invite them to a conversation with us. So there are many other things you can do. You can donate. I'll put the donation link in there again. And then we've got the petition. Is that right, Rashinda? And Rashinda, I think you might want to say a little more about that. It's brilliant. I love it. And it's a fun thing that we can do. I want to say finally that it's ironic that we were the first denomination to actually call for a transition away. And I hope the first won't be last in this instance. I hope that we can actually pass this resolution and shake the, as someone said, coal dust off our feet and wipe the liquefied natural gas and crude oil off our feet and move in solidarity with all these other people toward divestment and toward climate justice and a justly sourced clean energy future. So you want to say more about that link, Rashinda?
Yeah, just a couple quick things. I want to give a shout out to Jess Pepper, who is here on this call. Jess Pepper was her brainchild was Climate Cafe, and the shout out to the Climate Cafe Multifaith, which is only one type of climate cafe. And so connect with her. She's on this call if you're interested in that. And the link I just dropped will take you to more information about climate cafes. So Jess is in Scotland, and so it's late there. So yay, Jess, I'm so glad you could be here. So the petition letter is, we're always looking for tools to show how important this is, right? Local church, when, I'm in worship in the local church, I don't often feel like I have a way to be heard. And so this letter is about being heard, making the request plain that we would like this, and you can sign as an individual. You can sign your organization. So both of those would be great. Local churches can sign your local church on as long as you have permission. And if you are not a United Methodist, if you know people who are outside the United Methodism, we still appreciate that they care about it. Methodists need to understand that we are actors in the world, that people see our churches and they make decisions about how they will interact with us or what they think of us based on what our witness is in the world. So if we're not witnessing to clean energy and well-being and cleaning up refineries, and William touched on this, if folks of faith aren't witnessing to this, we're in a lot of trouble. And so folks outside of Methodism can let Methodists know, hey, we would really appreciate this. This would be a really, really good thing. So we are down to the last 2 minutes. And unfortunately, we don't really have any more time than that because we're going to close with prayer. William, thank you so much for being here. Steve, thank you so much for being here. Kathleen, oh my gosh, so glad to hear from you. Wonderful to have Bill here with us. Thank you, Sharon, for all the work you're doing with Fossil Free UMC. And Kathy, my goodness, the breadth of the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement. Thank you to Dawn, who is an Earth Keeper and helps with the whole Movement Cafe team. Really appreciate her work. And she's actually going to be praying us out today. So if there's anything else, put it in the chat. And kind of my job to say farewell. And first, we will pray together. So go ahead, Dawn.
Yes, and before I close this out in prayer, I do also want to just thank all the wonderful speakers. I feel educated and inspired, and I'm also just so grateful to all of you who came. That's what gives me hope, knowing everybody's in the trenches of their faith community doing this valuable work. This prayer actually came out of COP27, so if we can pray together.
God of blessings, the universe sings of your glory. Deepen our gratitude for all you have made and awaken in us a renewal commitment to care for the earth and each other. Inspire leaders with openness to listen to those most affected by climate change and with courage to act urgently and wisely so that our common home may be healed and restored and all people and generations to come may delight in it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
And thank you and goodbye. You should be able to save the chat, and we will be sending out email with the links attached. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here, for your care, for your heart, and for your work on divestment. All right, I'm going to hit the off button, which is always a bit abrupt. Thank you all for being here again. And we'll see you all for the next Movement Cafe.